Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share with you my January wrap up, and if you have watched my vlogs you have seen that January wasn't a great month for me. I had a lot of health struggles and so reading wasn't a big priority. I was also confined to my house a lot, so also my audiobook time was cut down because I usually listen to audiobooks when I walk to work and stuff like that. So I didn't do a ton of reading in January, but I still thought it would be enough to make a little video about it. So here are the 5 books that I've read in January, but before we get into those, I thought it would be interesting to let you know a couple of stats, because my main goal is to reduce my TBR, and so I thought starting this year in my wrap-ups I would talk about how I'm doing with that. So I hope you're interested in that. I will try to put in chapters, so if you don't care you can jump right ahead to the reviews of the books. Okay, so we have 3 important numbers when it comes to the size of my TBR. Obviously, the first one is the number of books that I have read, and that was 5 in January. Then we have the number of books that I have bought or received as gifts, and that was 13 in January because it was my birthday month, so I received quite a few books and I bought a couple of audiobooks. And then we have the number of books I borrowed in January, and that was 5. But out of those 5, I have returned 3 unread, so they are already off the TBR again. So if I take all of this together, in January my TBR has grown by 10 books, which isn't that great, but it is my birthday month, so that's always what's happened, and I think that's okay because then I have the rest of the year to kind of balance it out again until Christmas. Plus 10 books, so we started the year with 47 books on my TBR, and so at the end of January we were at 57 books, which obviously is the wrong direction from what I want to do, but that's alright because, as I said, it is my birthday month. So out of the 13 books I acquired, 10 were gifts and 3 were audiobooks that I bought. So I think that's all the stats we really need, so now let's get into the books. So the first book I started the year off with was an audiobook, and that was The Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by Kingfisher. This is a YA fantasy, I believe. It is a little bit younger. We are following a main character who is 14, I think, and she only has a little bit of magic. She can manipulate dough. So she works in a bakery, and one day she gets to work and there is a dead girl on the floor in her bakery. And that sets off a whole lot of events that eventually lead to her being the only hope for her city to save them from evil invaders. Now, as you can imagine, this is quite the wild journey that we're going on with our main character. It is very fun, very quirky. I don't think that Kingfisher did a great job at writing a 14-year-old in this one. The main character oftentimes felt a little bit too collected and calm for what was going on to be just 14 to me personally. But apart from that, I had so much fun with this book. I would definitely say that this is cozy fantasy because even though we do have stakes, just the whole like baking dough thing, it's just so cute and fun. And then also she has this little companion who is a gingerbread man who she brought to life basically. And yeah, there's also a bucket of sourdough. It's so funny, it's so quirky, it's so cute and cozy. So in the end I gave this book 4 stars, and as always with Kingfisher, I would definitely recommend if it sounds interesting to you. Then the next book I finished was Divine Arrivals by Rebecca Ross. This was a very hyped book last year and I got it through my library. So I was very interested to see whether this would actually be for me, because I'm not a big romance reader, and this is a little bit of a mix of a historical fiction with quite a bit of romance and some fantasy elements, I would say. So this is set in a completely different world, so that would make it fantasy, and we do have kind of the meddling gods theme, which is something I really enjoy. I like it when there's gods in a world and they kind of influence what's going on with the humans. But the whole feel of the story is very much First World War. So it has this like very historical feeling to it, and the fantasy elements are not focused on so strongly, apart from the whole reason there is a war is because of gods. And we do have a little bit of mythology thrown in there, but mainly it is this romance, which is kind of rivals, not enemies I would say, but rivals to lovers. So you can guess that from the title. And we have our main character who is working for a newspaper. She's kind of a journalist, and she has a rival. They're basically there for the same position, and so whoever does their tasks better will get that promotion. And so she's from a lower class background. Her brother went off to fight in the war, and so she only has her mum left. But because the brother left, the mum is not feeling so well. She is drinking a lot and not really supporting our main character. And then we have the male kind of love interest, but we also have his perspective in the book. And he is very high class, and he has a lot of expectations from his family about how his life should be and what would be the best position for him to further the wealth of the family and ensure that even through this war they will keep their social standing. And so he has a lot of pressure because of that. And since these two come together and they're kind of fighting for the same thing but for very different reasons, they clash quite a bit at the beginning because they just don't understand where the other person is coming from and what their struggles are. And I really enjoyed that. I think that it has a very slow beginning. It definitely takes a while to pick up steam, but when there is this like one thing that happens that then sets our female main character off on a certain path, then it is glorious. It's very high stakes, obviously. We're talking about a war, and looking at all of the horrible things that are happening, we're eventually following our characters into the trenches as well, and the whole like relationship dynamic throughout this book I really enjoyed. I think I really enjoyed both of these characters because you as a reader can see where they are coming from and why they might not always understand each other. So it's not like one person is like bad and it's enemies because of that or anything like that. So I definitely liked this one quite a lot. I think that the ending was really good as well. There is some twist at the end that I did kind of see coming, but when you're like in the moment and you're reading, you're like, oh my god, is that happening right now? So it was really, really good, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. Then the next book I finished was an audiobook again, and that was Cocaine Blues by Kerry Greenwood. This is the first book in the Miss Fisher series. I love the TV show. The TV show is like half of my personality, I would say. I absolutely adore it. And so since I've seen that and since I have learned that it actually is based on a book series, I always wanted to check out the book series. Now, this series started in the 80s, so this first book was written in the 80s, and you have to keep that in mind if you ever want to pick this book up. But this one is basically the first episode of the TV show. So we are following Miss Fisher, who is a young woman in the 1920s. She is originally from Australia, but then her parents inherited in Great Britain. And so at the beginning of the book, she is leaving England to go back to Australia for a case, because she's kind of a sleuth. So she is supposed to find someone for a family friend, and that gets her mixed up in all kinds of things. So this is more of a mystery where it's just a lot of stuff is going on, and some of it is connected, but yeah, it's kind of a lot, and the book is really not that long. Now you have to keep in mind it was written in the 80s, and so there are some questionable things in there. This book also deals with abortions and illegal abortions, but the stance that our like central characters take is that abortions can be safe, but the way the illegal ones are done are not, and so they must be stopped. So I think that is a very reasonable stance on that. So it's nothing that bothers me, but I can imagine that this is something other people might not want to read about. So yeah, we are following Miss Fisher meeting new friends, and if you've seen the show, Miss Fisher is a very sexually and romantically open person, so it does have some flirtations as well. I would say that compared to the TV show, the detective didn't play such a big role, but maybe I also don't quite remember the first episode so well. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it was quite fun. I think that the TV show is like the woke big sister of this book. So my nostalgia kind of for the show also played into that. And in the end, I decided to give this book 3 stars. And I can see myself continuing on with it when I'm in the mood to kind of overlook some of the more questionable things. And then came a time when I didn't really read a lot, but I eventually finished Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross, which is the sequel to Divine Rivals, so I don't want to say too much about what it is about. We're basically following our characters again in a way. You'll have to find out what that means because I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, this is a duology, so I finished that one off in 1 month. Who am I even? Very good, very, very well done myself. I did, however, have a harder time with the sequel just because I decided to switch to the audiobook because my library didn't have the ebook for the sequel yet. And so kind of the switch between formats was a little bit of a challenge at first. And then also I wasn't feeling well, and as I said, my audiobook time was cut down quite a lot because a lot of the things that I usually do where I listen to my audiobook I didn't do because of my health. And so I just listened to it in like 10-minute intervals basically, and so it just suffered a little bit. But at the same time, I feel like I also didn't like the story as much as I did in the first book. And also the like fantasy elements, there were some cool things thrown in there, but then we don't really explore them. Like there is this magical car, which I thought was so cool, but then that doesn't really go anywhere. They just needed to go from A to B and that's it, basically. So I think that this one has a little bit more action, but still it felt like it dragged a little bit for me. So that does sound very negative, but that's why I prefaced it with I wasn't feeling well. So in the end I gave this one 4 stars, which is still a good rating and I still really enjoyed it. I think it is a well done duology, and if you're interested in it, I would definitely recommend picking it up. And I say that as a not romance reader. And then the last book I finished was also an audiobook, and that was Death at Wentwater Court by Carola Dunn. Now, this one is also a 1920s mystery, so I'm working on a little like vlog with that theme, so I wanted to try more books that are similar to Miss Fisher. And this one we're following a woman called Daisy Dalrymple, and she is also from a good family, so she's also kind of like aristocratic or whatever. I don't know what the Brits do, but she is in a similar situation to Miss Fisher in that way, but then she decided to be cut off from her family, so she doesn't have the wealth, the money, so she needs to work, and she works as a journalist, and she's going to this estate, Wentwater Court, to write for a journal about the estates of rich people. And so she knows some of these people who live there just from her family connections, but she's actually there to write about this estate, about the house, and kind of like the history of the house and stuff like that. But when she is there, a murder occurs, and so she kind of gets wrapped up in this. And this first book is very much not her fault, I would say, or not something that she seeks out, but because she's kind of an outsider of this family, but she was there when everything happened, she's kind of the trustee or like the confidant of the detective who comes to investigate the case, and they kind of solve it together. For the most part, I like this one. It is set in January, so it fit the vibes quite well. But then the ending happened, and the ending was so offensive to me that I just had to bump a whole star off and give it 2 stars, and I would not recommend. And this was actually written a little bit later than Miss Fisher. This was written in the 90s, which might have something to do with that. Basically, at the end, there is a moment where Daisy compares sailing a ship to Brazil to live between snakes and dangerous indigenous people to being in prison. She's like, well, being in prison might actually be nicer. Like, what? What? And there's more comments like that, just like throwaway things. And there's this one character who she describes as being like very business savvy, but he owns plantations in South America. It just wasn't a vibe. It wasn't great. So would not recommend this one. I think if you can overlook some problematic things, read Miss Fisher or just don't. So yeah, I would not go into Daisy Dalrymple if I were you. So now the reason I didn't read more apart from my health is that I got halfway through Babel during the month, but then I had to give it back to the library because someone was in line after me, and now I have to wait to get it back. So imagine I have read like half of Babel as well. That was my month. Okay, so that's it. That's all the books I have for January. I really hope, and I'm quite confident, that February will be better. I'm definitely feeling already a little bit better, and I also really like the books I'm currently reading, so that's very helpful. And I hope you have a lovely February, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!